Recording in progress.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar on the status of digital project and construction management technology adoption in the Sub-Sahara Africa construction market, sponsored by Oracle Construction and Engineering. I'm Shannon Durejo from Creamer Media's Contract Publishing. Today's webinar will examine how the global construction industry is pursuing rapid productivity improvements by adopting digital technology as a lever to improve construction productivity. The panelists will consider the state of the Sub-Sahara Africa construction market regarding the adoption of digital project and construction management technology. Their views aim to understand what productivity challenges should or could be addressed through technology adoption. What is the vision for a construction site in 2030? The current state of technology adoption in the construction industry, limitations and incentives for digital adoption in the sector, and the role of government in stimulating digital adoption in the construction sector. The speakers joining us today are Werner Maritz, Director of Industry Strategy at Oracle Construction and Engineering, Vernon Harley, Global Lead for Public Infrastructure at Accenture, Professor Miriam Altman, Director of Altman Advisory, as well as presently leading the drafting of government's National Infrastructure Plan 2050, and Querbus Kraus, Strategic Account Executive at Oracle Construction and Engineering. Before we begin, please take note of the following. To encourage interaction, we have enabled the chat and the Q&A function. Please post your questions into the Q&A box, which you'll find on the panel at the bottom of your screen. The panelists will answer as many of your questions as possible at the end of the session. You can also interact with the panelists and other attendees in the chat box, which you'll also find at the bottom of your screen. Please be aware that we are recording this webinar. We'll send you a copy of the recording when it's available. We're also streaming the webinar live on YouTube. Today's facilitator is Werner Maritz, who will take the proceedings forward. Werner is a member of the Industry Strategy team at Oracle Construction and Engineering Global Business Unit, focusing on public sector and infrastructure development programs. As a certified cost professional, he has a passion for the digital transformation of the project and construction management disciplines, with a keen interest in the role BIM plays in improving project profitability. managing project risk, and reducing construction costs. So now it's over to you, Werner.
Thanks, Shannon, and thanks for the opportunity for Kramer Media Contract Publishing to help us bring such important discussions to the engineering news community. I would really like to thank all our panel members today for generously giving us time. We really appreciate it. Over the past couple of years, we've seen many African governments, especially South Africa, place a renewed focus on leveraging public infrastructure development as an economic catalyst to modernize the project supply chain and to create jobs and create economic prosperity on a national, regional, and even continental basis. What we've also seen and experienced, unfortunately, is a lack of delivery or slow delivery on some of the objectives across the continent. From a recent research report we did with Engineering News, it seems that there is a shared responsibility for improving the situation of delivery on projects. On the one hand, we've got public sector as the planner of infrastructure projects. And on the other hand, we've got the private sector as the delivery arm of these projects. And it's really like two sides of the same coin, if I can put it that way. So we see governments, including South Africa, launching significant effort in recasting the way that people think about infrastructure planning and infrastructure delivery. And on the other hand, we see the construction industry pursuing rapid productivity improvements by adopting digital technology as a lever to improve their productivity and profitability. And this is good news for us, as the construction industry represents a significant part of the GDP spent in South Africa and across the rest of Africa. So technology innovation is only one of many levers we have at our disposal to improve infrastructure construction productivity, right? And today we will learn more about the context of these large transformative projects and some of the other tools we can leverage to bring sustained improvements into the sector. So Prof. Altman, I would like to start with you this afternoon. As South Africans, we hear a lot about the National Development Plan, the National Infrastructure Plan 2050. It's in the news, in the media. On a regular basis, we hear Minister De Lille talk about Infrastructure South Africa, about the SIPs, the PICC, and we hear President Ramaphosa talking about infrastructure investment in South Africa. So for more than a decade, you've been intimately involved in the National Planning Commission in South Africa, and more recently worked on drafting the National Infrastructure Plan 2050. And I must say that that's really an aspirational read on South Africa's view of future operating environment for our infrastructure development. And on top of this busy schedule, you also find time to be a professor at the University of Johannesburg. Can you please tell us more about Altman Advisory, the process of drafting the NIP 2050, and the role of this document to accelerate South Africa towards our development objectives? Over to you, Prof. Prof, you're on mute. Professor, thank you.
Excuse me. That happens far too often. So you've asked me actually two very different questions. One is, what does Altman Advisory do? And that is my strategy consultancy company, which pre-COVID, I was in and out of China quite a bit. I was building up a clientele of Chinese and Indian corporates that were positioning in Africa and helping them develop their businesses, capital raising, that kind of thing. I work with digital companies, and it's a strategy advisory both for commercial and public sector. So that's I guess the quick answer. But more importantly for this session, what is going on with the National Infrastructure Plan is probably the main question. Yeah. So. So I was as you're saying, I was a commissioner on the National Planning Commission since inception, since 2010, and was part of writing the National Development Plan. And in the past 5 years, I was in a second term, and in that time, we did. I led considerable work on economic progress, or lack of it, but economic progress, and what we do to make better progress is that's the only way you can think about it, is you can't cry over spilt milk. It hasn't been going well, and why is that? With a considerable focus on the institution of government, frankly, and how we strengthen capacity. We did a lot of work on state-owned enterprise, infrastructure state-owned enterprises, particularly Eskom, Transnet, PRASA, these types, how we improve performance. And we did a lot of work actually partnering with Ron Watermayer and Sean Phillips, who I'm sure you all know, who worked with us on thinking about public infrastructure delivery and the construction sector dynamism. That work, when I've stopped talking, I'll provide everybody in the room with some links that may be useful. But it was that work, and that's all available online for people who haven't seen it yet, although we've done considerable engagement with the industry. So probably many people who are here are aware of it, I hope, and if not, it's available. And we tried to focus as much as possible, not so much on what we need to do, but who and how, because we think that that's the main problem we have right now. So dial forward, Dr. Ramagopa and Minister Jalil asked me if I would then, I've stepped off the National Planning Commission now. In fact, there is no commission right now. There's a bit of a hiatus. And so they're in between terms. And I was asked to lead the development of the National Infrastructure Plan. So the interesting thing about that is that it takes essentially what our recommendations were as an advisory body, the National Planning Commission, and it translates it into what would become a cabinet-approved plan. So it's the clearest link we've probably had for a very long time between, maybe ever, between this type of advisory support in the presidency to planning, budgeting, and so forth. So that's the one take home that should be heartening, was that I was specifically asked to help with it for that reason. And the National Infrastructure Plan is going to be done in 2 phases. People should be aware. The first version, and I'll give the link to the draft of the first phase. The first phase, and again, many of you would have been in a session, because when you say you know about it, I'm very glad to know that. We were in stakeholder consultation since August. Probably it's like a roadshow. So I've been connecting with different kinds of stakeholder groups since August, probably 2 sessions a day for about 2 or 3 months. And then the document was revised and it's now back in it. It's just been recommended to be put to cabinet. And because of the elections, that was delayed. So that's going to cabinet in February. And what this version does, it focuses on 4 sectors, namely big bulk infrastructure was the first phase. So, and many of you have heard me give this talk. So apologies to those who have heard it. But I think I'd just like to share it with people who haven't. So we focused on electricity, freight transport, water, bulk water, and telecommunications. Is everybody on mute? If I can just ask, because I've got a noise in my ear. So
yes, they do seem to be, Miriam.
Somebody's got a swishing sound, but that's okay. I'll
Sorry
survive.
about that.
I'll try to keep concentrating. So thank you. So now there's going to be a second phase that I imagine will start at the beginning of the year. And we're going to be looking at more distributed services. So in other words, the parts of these industries that I've just mentioned that are not about the bulk industry, but about the distribution of them, the municipal services, commuter transport, and that type of thing, which we saw as requiring a different kind of stakeholder engagement, a very different kind of thinking to these big bulk infrastructure. Now, the reason this becomes important, and we've had a lot of engagement, in fact, Ron was helping us with this National Infrastructure Plan as well, is that as we well know, when we're talking about the health of the construction sector, it depends, civil construction, it depends quite considerably on the health and flow of government projects. You know, it's just an obvious point. And that's something we've been trying to get across to government as well. They need to be clear, have regular flow. Because when you talk about, you know, the topic of this session, digital services in construction, it's very hard to invest in forward-looking technology and even in human resource development if that project pipeline's not clear. So one knows. I mean, it's just an obvious point. The industry's been saying it to us, and it's just an obvious point. So the National Infrastructure Plan becomes very important in that. Now, once, hopefully, it gets approved in February, it is not an advisory document. It becomes the policy of the day. And so the things that are important in there that the industry would like to take up, I would urge the industry to find its voice within that, because now it becomes the policy of the day. It means that government needs to be accountable to the things that it agreed to. Now, some of those things, if I'll just, and I know I'm taking long, but I'll just want to raise four things that we might want to talk about in the session. The first is that we make a very big deal about what we call knowledge services, because I didn't know what else to call it. And it's a group of things that says we need to strengthen leadership, technical capability, in other words, like engineering capability in the procurement process, engineering capability and the oversight of delivery of complex engineering projects and construction projects, financial capability, the ability to partner, anything that goes into being able to do these kinds of areas. And I'm not talking about like highfalutin, even scientific skills, although that's part of it. I mean the highly skilled technical capabilities needed just to basically deliver, because we see that as one of the most critical challenges as to why we're not making progress. And we really need to zero into that. The second is to clarify the project pipeline. And I'm just raising stuff that I think will be interesting for this session. Third is the capacity to partner. So we make a very big deal about needing to strengthen the ability to work of the public sector and the private sector to work together in various forms, not necessarily PPPs in its legal form, but different kinds of alliances and relationships. And then finally, transparency of reporting on projects is probably one of the most critical recommendations that enables accountability. And all of those things should be things that are interesting to the sector, and once approved, are things that the industry can pick up, whether it's through PPGI or through other channels. I know it's a mouthful. I hope it's helpful.
Yeah, thank you very much. This is very insightful, and I specifically enjoy the section on knowledge services, because that's really about putting capacity into the government as a project customer, and also the section on transparency and reporting, which really relates to me to open contracting, monitoring, evaluation, performance reporting, and really gaining insight from the data that we accumulate within those projects. So thank you much. We will continue having a discussion on these points. Very insightful. Vernon, can I step over to you for a moment? Accenture, for the last couple of years, have been very involved in public infrastructure initiatives, both in South Africa and globally. So it's really a global scale where you provide these services. So I was wondering if you can tell us a little bit more about the group in Accenture that you're with, that really focus on public services, and any advice you've got for us in terms of how we transform infrastructure development portfolios to be managed at national or organizational level.
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much, Werner. And firstly, apologies for having two pictures on the screen at once. My laptop's camera failed, so I'm on my phone. But I really appreciate the opportunity, and it's an honor for me to be on this panel discussion with yourself, Professor Altman and Corbus. I work within our city's infrastructure and transportation industry group, alongside Industry X capital projects in Accenture globally. So our cities group is pretty much focused on mobility as a service within and around cities, integration of data for transportation, operating systems, and then global critical infrastructure services and solutions, which is where I sit. And yes, we have been working for a number of years supporting owner operators and engineering procurement construction firms in the private and the public sector, helping them to adopt technology and new ways of working to overcome the challenges, and some of them that Miriam mentioned, around delayed projects, over budget, etc. So, but in terms of, I guess, following on from what Miriam mentioned around the investment plan, I think what I'd like to talk about a little bit about is the development of the infrastructure portfolio. because it speaks to the development of that infrastructure plan and then the execution of that from planning through to the actual program and project execution and then onto operations and maintenance, and how we can develop that in an efficient way. And I think it's especially important and critical now, given the stimulus funding that's flowing down across the world. In the US recently, there's the infrastructure bill that's been passed. There's trillions of dollars coming downstream into the public sector for infrastructure programs, as well as the EU and even in locally in sub-Saharan Africa. So what is a little bit scary is that a lot of our clients are operating on Excel spreadsheets when it comes to actually doing that investment planning, and really are not utilizing sophisticated tools to help them with that process. I think also right now it's a hot topic around sustainability, carbon reduction, etc. And I think that this infrastructure portfolio phase is it's a critical place, or I think the best place to start driving sustainability, throughout this infrastructure life cycle. So it is also interesting that the clients that I work with outside of sub-Saharan Africa are dealing with the very same challenges that sub-Saharan Africa is dealing with. And it seems like from a digital adoption perspective, sub-Saharan Africa is by no means behind the rest of the world. I think there's an opportunity right now for us to build back better and leveraging technology to help us with that. So to be more specific around portfolio management, I think there's a needs identification phase where we have to assess needs, socioeconomic and asset needs. Those bridges, those roads that need to be refurbished and upgraded needs to come into this this investment planning process. And there needs to be a set of criteria that organizations use to evaluate those projects against whatever the strategic objectives are, but also including sustainability as part of that. So it's the ability to be able to have that information available as well. And this is where our clients are struggling. So you can imagine that there's information related to existing in-flight programs and projects that are sitting in disparate tools. There's information sitting within the asset register that's sometimes difficult to get out. There's all sorts of external databases where information is sitting that portfolio managers need to include, such as census data, traffic data, other kinds of data that needs to come into that process. And so we have an opportunity to help our clients bring that information together more seamlessly, and then to leverage the tools to help them with that project evaluation process. The benefits are huge. Building, more in a sustainable, resilient manner right from the inception phase, but then taking what you've built in that investment plan and executing that, having the tools and the one source of truth across program and project controls all the way through. And that includes, the engineering, procurement, and construction firms that come in to do the actual delivery, because they bring their own systems and tools as well. So it's a big struggle at the moment to try and make head or tail of information in that process, given the many different disparate places where that information can come from. So this is the kind of thing that we're trying to help our clients with, this is to make that information more readily available for decision making. I think, as a portfolio manager, whether it's a Department of Transportation, whether it's a Public Works, or even at national level, the executives want to be able to have a portfolio view of what's happening on the ground, and to be able to react quickly when there's a change. And the only way you can do that is if you link what you've created in the investment plan down to what's happening on the project, on the construction side. So.
Thank you, Vernon. I think what you've just discussed really speaks to the capacity and the data insights. And Miriam, I was wondering if I can come back to you. Given the information that Vernon shared about the portfolio and bringing the EPCs in there, if we consider South Africa in its totality, not just public sector, but private sector as well, We have lost a lot of skills and ability to actually execute on large projects, right? Over the last couple of years, whether that's people emigrating, people retiring, not enough professionals coming into the industry. In your opinion, how can we actually help to capacitate the state to be a good customer? And how can we put capacity into private sector to deliver? And most importantly, how do we actually leverage private sector funding to bring this all together and actually delivering? I know that's a hot topic, and how we provide public-private partnerships. And to me, the question that I often get from other countries is, how do we make sure that the funding agents or the people giving the money actually are confident that the projects will be delivered well and according to budget and within time, because their investment is on the line, right? So it brings all this capacity to deliver plus the assurance to the funding agents together. How do we do that? That's a difficult question, and I think you're a good person to answer that for us.
You're putting me in the hot seat here.
Yes.
My favorite place. And then of course, if I can just add to your set of very difficult hot questions is, which will be a bigger issue in the second phase of the NIP, is about revenue collection.
Of course, yes.
Because when you're raising private finance, that's obviously the biggest concern, is whether, particularly in economic infrastructure, which is really where you raise money. You don't normally raise money for social infrastructure. It's usually for economic infrastructure, where you can collect, and that's also been a concern. Look, the reality is, if you want to eat an elephant, you've got to eat it bite by bite, right? So, let's not get overwhelmed by this thing. A certain minimum capability is needed to oversee the procurement and oversight of major infrastructure projects in the SOEs, in critical locations in the state, and we'll be doing some work on local government, but obviously on local government. It doesn't mean you need thousands of people. You need some people. And there has to be a commitment in the state to making sure that there's a certain capability in key locations. And this is why in the National Planning Commission and in the National Infrastructure Plan, we make recommendations as to where that needs to be and what kind of capability, like in other words, registration of technical capability, at least the person who's overseeing a major tender, as an example. I may still sit with a CFO, but that it's not, the so-called, it's not the same, people say it's not the same as procuring pens and paper, everybody's favorite expression. But the point is that it's not. And so you can't juniorize procurement, which is what happens, of major infrastructure. There have to be at least a minimum number of people in leadership positions that are overseeing it. So again, it doesn't mean you need even 1,000. Even if you had, say, 20, that would make a difference. Just as an example, in important locations to lead these processes. And we need to go step by step, and we need to assert that that is important. And the problem I find in South Africa is that there's a history of not really, I don't mean this 100%, but there's a history of not focusing on the development of people and technical capability. And I realize that sounds funny when you're in, say, the construction sector, because of course there's huge capability development over many years. But when a lot of the work I've been doing in the National Planning Commission is focused on this problem of capacity. And what you find is that everybody wants to talk about what needs to be done, but not so much on strengthening the leadership and the specific technical capabilities. So I often refer to my experience in telecom, which was a perfect example, where they brought in a strong board, a strong CEO, of course, a very strong head of strategy, and which was me. And one of the things we did, so firstly, if you've got somebody like Sipho Maseko and a strong board, you don't actually need to worry about the detail of it. What you need to know is you need to hold them to account to do what they need to do, because they're going to eat, sleep, dream, have nightmares over it, right? and certainly have the capability to do it. So this is why I've been hammering away as a commissioner and in the National Infrastructure Plan around that issue of leadership in core locations, because then those leaders will have a comfort in partnering with the private sector, just as a start. Now, the thing is that when you say, well, how are we going to bring the capacity back into the private sector? How's the whole thing going to happen? If we can get that project flow moving, I think that you will find the response. People will come back. It's not the most ideal way, but I think, and correct me if you think I'm wrong, but I think that things would be very different if there was this flow. And that message also needs to get across that we need clear, firstly, a commitment to the project pipeline, not stop and start, and government needs to understand why that's important, and pressure to make sure that happens and that it's transparent.
Yep. Now, Miriam, can I ask you to step a moment into your other role as Professor of Fourth Industrial Revolution at UJ? Can we use technology to help build this capacity and enable the people that we've got to actually perform their jobs within this industry? Magic question around technology.
Okay, so I don't know if you're going to like my answer.
Give it to us in any case.
I would say the answer is not in that order. I'm a big believer in, this is how we drove the change at telecom. You've got to get the basics right. Technology is not going to solve the problem. People will solve the problem. You've got to have effective leadership in place. You've got to get the basics right. So, like, for example, just to take the telecom story, because that is a technology company. But even so, our mantra was, we're going to do the basics before we do the cool stuff. So we get pressure, say, for example, to have a streaming service. And I just would say, when you're hemorrhaging customers, as we were in 2013, who's going to use a streaming service when they're not using your network? That kind of thing. Yeah. So the first thing is you've got to get the basics right, meaning staff morale, basic deployment issues, pipeline moving, etc. Can technology help? Absolutely. So, for example, the kind of conversation one should be having is, if we don't have enough water engineers, which I'm just giving that example because we know that's true. That's been surveyed. That's just a fact. At a municipal level, there are ways of deploying staff in a different way where, just as an example, you have higher skill people sitting in the headquarters and through video working with more semi-skill, or the skill at the coalface can be less. And then that high skill person's used, that scarce high skill is used more effectively because they're not running around the city. And guiding through video, repair, installation, whatever needs to be done. That's the kind of thing that could be instituted, but you can't do that unless you've got the core. It'll never work if you don't have an office and staff that are working together reasonably effectively to start with. It doesn't fix that problem, and your services won't get better. By you can't leapfrog to that.
Excellent. Thanks for that insight. Vernon, given the importance of one of the aspects of the NIP is about monitoring and performance reporting, right? On right last section, you can almost miss it if you don't read the full document. Can you give us some insight on Accenture's view on the role and status of technology adoption in Sub-Saharan Africa construction market? And maybe how we can help organizations to implement a successful digital strategy in the sector. I know you've done a lot of work around this recently.
Thanks, Werner. I think first I'd love to just respond to Miriam there. I think I agree, but I also believe that technology should go hand in hand with that process, instead of, rather than it being left until the basics, as it were fixed. We stand to lose a lot of ground that way. And I don't know if that's what you're meaning, Miriam, but I do agree wholeheartedly that, and this is what we are saying, and I'll talk about a little bit more just now, is that many of our clients who have invested heavily in digital are not reaping the benefits. And why is that? And I think a lot of it does come down to exactly what Miriam, you have mentioned, which is behavioral change around data, becoming data stewards, right from the top, the C-level, a C-suite level, and driving that down in the organization, getting the skills and capabilities embedded. But I think because there's even a modernization required at the enterprise level in terms of technology. A lot of our clients are sitting on way old, outdated technology. And even from that point of view, and it's not even talking about new digital, right? So there is definitely, I think, a process that our clients need to go through, a maturity in terms of both people, process, and technology. But I think ideally it would be good for those to happen together. I think from in terms of the opportunity at the moment around the new stimulus funds coming through and the infrastructure programs that are coming, that are going to have to be delivered. It's a great opportunity to use those projects and the PMOs that are set up to bring in these new technologies and to get people upskilled in the digital space. What we are seeing now in the UK, for example, with the national highways, is that they are going to going to market with procurements for design and delivery partnerships. And what the market is responding with, so the engineering, procurement, and construction firms that are responding to get that work are forming alliances. Okay, so that's a way of bringing that capacity that Miriam was talking about to these infrastructure programs through these design and delivery partnerships. And what National Highways is doing is putting a lot of emphasis on utilizing digital and green technologies. So we're not just talking about systems, we're talking about technologies that are used to actually build a road, for example, those kinds of technologies. So I had the experience earlier this year as well to actually be involved in a motorway scheme expansion. And it was very interesting to be part of those discussions and hear the different ideas and innovations that came out from hackathon sessions we had, where we had the opportunity to bring in new technologies that would improve productivity and things like the safety, improve safety and things like that around the construction site. So I think there's a great opportunity with these infrastructure programs coming down the line and through procurement, a procurement process that is incentivized for all to benefit. I think, we can help organizations implement a successful digital strategy. And there is also a lot of noise out there in terms of digital. People are talking about digital twins, there's building information modeling. So there's this huge expectation on digital just being like a silver bullet. But there is a lot of modernization required. And as we said earlier, there's capability, behavioral change required. And I think earlier in the year, our industry X practice conducted some research and we produced some insights. We captured over 1 million data points from 570 executives across owner-operators. There were over 140 responses from EPCs. And 9 out of 10 companies say that they use average or good quality data, yet only a third are achieving the benefits. So 2/3 are not achieving the benefits required. And the observations that came from that research is that there's a failure to build the right operating environment and incentives to create a data-centric culture, and an inability to operationalize the data and take for more effective decision-making. And what the Industry X team have come up with is this capstone framework called Capital Project Strategic Operating Environment, which is geared towards in helping our clients embed those two things. So the right operating environment and operationalizing data. There's 4 things that they focused on. It's getting that C-suite commitment. It's contextualizing data sets. So, data is only data if it doesn't have any context to it. And there's a lot of disparate systems, and through that disparity, we're losing context around the data, which makes it difficult for people to make those decisions. So there's an opportunity there to help architect new application environments to fix that. And then there's the stewards, the data stewards, and getting people in the organization up to speed with new technologies. And of course, we've mentioned it before, the incentive-based contracts. Let's get away from this adversarial contracting process, lowest price and all that. Let's have a contracting and procurement process that is collaborative. Thanks, Werner.
Thanks, Vernon, and I'm glad you highlighted the role of technology there in the overall success of Capstone and data not just being data, but actually putting into context of how to use that data. Otherwise, you've just wasted your money accumulating the data. So, Kobus, over to you. I didn't forget about you. I specifically left you to this point. And Kobus, how do we help our project teams and construction teams to actually implement this technology platform to help them so that it is contextualized, that the data is actually information, that we can get project owner team and project delivery team on the same platforms, talking to each other, enabling the project supply chain and the procurement function to effectively provide governance there. What's your view from an Oracle point of view?
Werner, thank you very much, and Vernon also, and Professor Altman. Very important technology. I agree with Professor Altman that technology can only be an enabler. You have to get the basics in place for people to be able to exploit the technology and achieve benefits from using the technology. I'm going to give my age a little bit away. In the 90s and the 20s, it was entirely acceptable to select point solutions and then embark on massive integration projects to get different solutions to work together. And most often those projects failed and never delivered the promised value and benefits to the organization. Nowadays, that will be frowned upon as a strategy to implement point solutions. And it's strongly recommended to look at platforms. Platforms are technologies that you acquire that's already integrated, that provides most, if not all, of the functionality that's required for project teams to work together, to allow managers and executives to do the monitoring and evaluation, evaluate projects if you started the cycle, at the beginning of the cycle, evaluate different projects, and select the ultimate portfolio of projects. Very important today not to spend time buying point solutions and trying to integrate those. Without the integration, you'll exactly achieve what Werner just highlighted. You'll have data that's not in context. You can't compare it with data that sits in other silos. So creating these silos of data, I think it's a huge risk to projects. The large risk is that people will be working off different versions of data. Mistakes will happen on the project. And it becomes impossible to predict the outcome of the project if the data is not in a single environment where you can contextualize it and also report properly on the data.
Thanks, Kobus. And sort of what's your view on deployment? I know that many of organizations used to have their own large data centers, and Renette was just telling us earlier today that their office had a power failure and their data center is running on a generator. So my question about data centers, how should customers think about deployment of technology these days?
Absolutely, and I think the word cloud comes into mind immediately is to look at cloud solutions, to run your own data center, to have your own technology skills, to try and maintain that. And specifically, if you've got many different solutions, it becomes an impossible task. I think in countries like South Africa, Southern Africa, Africa for that matter, the lack of skills already is a problem. So cloud offers technology where you don't have the complexity of having to maintain data centers, disaster recovery, and all of those technical aspects of it. Oracle and other organizations provide cloud solutions nowadays. And it's predicted that within not too long from now, most solutions will run in cloud environments. And there are many organizations offering cloud solutions like Oracle. The beauty of cloud, of course, it's accessible from anywhere in the world. You don't have to be on an internal network or on WAN or any one of those networks. You can access it via the internet. Very important, and I'm not sure whether you're going to ask a question about cybersecurity, of course. extremely important. We've got recent examples in South Africa. I think our famous freight rail organization just recently had a cyber attack, a ransomware attack, where people were shut off the systems. They couldn't access systems for weeks on end. They've lost data. In certain cases, they had to go back to old data to start operating again. And that's part of the reality in terms of technology. It's complex. There are very clever people all over the world that wants to attack your systems. And it speaks again in terms of trying to do it yourself. Organizations will do well nowadays to focus on their niche. If you're a freight rail organization, focus on freight rail. If you're a construction organization, focus on that. And allow the specialized organizations that provide software technology to focus on that and provide you the security you need in the cyberspace. I think if you, a simple Google search will show you that the priorities of CIOs in the year 2021 and 22, you'll always find in the top 3 cybersecurity, information security as part of that top 3. It varies sometimes it's first and sometimes it's third, but it certainly is top 3 in terms of that. The reality is once you've been infiltrated, a ransomware attack has happened, your organization is in trouble, and to recover from that is quite difficult. Most of the cloud solution providers out there has got technologies, got the brightest people in the world to prevent these kind of attacks to happen, and has got surplus technology or dedicated technology available to manage these attacks. An organization like Oracle will tell you, no official numbers available, but our websites experience thousands of attacks on a daily basis, and we are able to currently successfully prevent those attacks from happening. I mean, imagine you as an organization, a freight rail organization or construction company trying to compete in that space. It just becomes very difficult.
Yeah. Now, Kobus, Vernon mentioned about project owner-operators and EPC companies, and Miriam also talked about the state and the private sector. So important thing there is to actually make sure we don't have these silos of data, right? How do we build that sort of single collaborative environment, a single version of the truth, to turn silos of data into a lake of data that people can actually use to make decisions for monitoring and performance reporting and those type of things?
Absolutely, very important, Werner. The silos of information is a huge problem on projects. The reality is whether you're in the owner's organization or whether you are contracted to the owner, public sector or other, you are part of the same team and you need to share the same information. So a common data environment is extremely important, where all the systems that you use actually share the data in a single space where people can access the information. So whether whatever your role on the project is, whether you're a planner, whether you're a finance manager, procurement person on the project, etc., it's very important that the information is centrally located for people to access it. It's the only way that you can get a holistic view in terms of the project progress, risk on the project. And if you look at estimations to complete, projects nowadays are just too complex, and the pressures on the projects to deliver, whether that's economic or social benefits, are just too great not to have the information in a single place where you can track and monitor the data. Yeah. And really the only way you can achieve that is by the platform where you have that available.
Yeah. Thanks, Kobus. I want to ask a last question to each of the panelists. Same question, 3 answers, 3 views in a couple of minutes. So we look at a reference economy like the UK, where they've got the large capital improve or delivery unit. The government has mandated certain adoption of technology like BIM strategies and so on. And we think about our own space and where we are from a technology point of view in sub-Saharan Africa. So my question to each one of you is, what should the role of government be in advancing technology? I know, for example, Minister Patel is often talking about the 4th Industrial Revolution and how we leverage that. But what should be the role of government, whether our government or any other government in Africa, mandating a certain approach to technology adoption within the construction industry to to improve productivity, as an example, and leverage that data for future generations. Thinking about building information modeling, digital twins, those type of things. Miriam, can we start with you? And you're on mute, so let me tell you that up front.
Thanks.
Thanks.
I think we've got to be careful. Firstly, we're not the UK, as I'm sure you're right, you know. I think we've got to be careful about where we say government should be, advising on this technology or that technology. I think we can take a generalized view. The first thing is just getting our act together around having a project pipeline would enable, and stability within that flow would enable firms to innovate generally and adopt new technology. But companies aren't going to do that, I think, unless there is that flow. Or they may do it for other countries that they're involved in, but they won't do it in relation to these projects in South Africa. That's number one. So that right there would probably help. Number two, it's in the nature of support from like in the National Infrastructure Plan, we give Department of Science and Innovation a special role in development of knowledge services, and that does in fact include the science element within it and product development. So, having almost like a grand challenge, or having knowing how important infrastructure is, treating that as an area of scientific and innovation, a center for innovation, would be very important. In other words, giving funding to innovative firms to develop new technology and capability. And the third area is the way that infrastructure is procured. In other words, you can be encouraging modernization and introduction of new methodologies, new technology through the way that you procure. I don't know if that makes any sense, but that's how I might tackle something. But I wouldn't have government saying you should be adopting these kinds of digital technologies. I just don't think that we're there. I don't think that's where we are.
Excellent, thanks. Vernon, your view on the topic?
Yeah, I think government has a massive role to play in the advancement of technology and using it for the better good. I think if you look at building information modeling, I think is a good example, because this is what has, I guess, spread the use of widespread use of building information modeling tools in the last 2 years was through governments actually adopting it as a framework. And I know South Africa has a really good framework already in the IDMS, which is fantastic. And then building information modeling is just another process from design through to handover that is it's a process but enabled by technology. But I think through the procurement process, I agree with Miriam, there's an opportunity to stipulate in the procurement that we would like information to come back in a certain way so that we can report back up the chain. So there's that influence, and then they hold all the keys. I mean, the projects that are coming down the line that have to be delivered. There's mega projects that have to be delivered. So on those projects, that's an opportunity to bring that fourth industrial revolution capability to bear. And I know that also the funds is actually funds management, and the sources of funds are going to come from multiple different places, and they're going to be strings attached to those funds. So I think even from, and then when I talk about strings, I'm talking about, well, it needs to be sustainability built in if you want to use those funds, for example. So there's ways and means right up the chain for technology and other things to be driven through government on infrastructure mega projects.
Thanks, Vernon. Kobus?
Yeah, I agree, I think, with both, but perhaps more with Vernon. I think government has got a huge role to play in terms of the adoption of technology. Perhaps not the selection of specific technology, but certainly in terms of setting standards, and be inspirational in terms of using technology. We know we've got a skills shortage in South Africa, and the last thing we want is people to leave the country simply because they're not exposed to the latest technology available. We know the new generations of people entering the marketplace, well, they're all excited by technology, etc. And we've got to keep that excitement within our space too. Of course, not just for the sake of it, but we have to benefit, and the projects that we're involved in has to benefit from the technology. And I do believe that government, whether that's from an education point of view, Prof, you already at a university, whether at an education point of view, adoption within organizations and on projects, I think government has got a huge role to play.
Thank you very much, Kobus. And I would like to thank all the panelists. I think your contributions are exceptionally valuable in terms of this wider discussion. Wherever we go in Africa and we engage with public or private sector, technology is always at the forefront of discussion. Dare I say, even in the middle of Africa when we speak to customers there. And I think from a technology point of view, Sub-Saharan Africa is not necessarily far behind or even at all behind the rest of the world in terms of adopting that, as Vernon pointed out. So thank you very much for participation today. I want to leave some time for a question and answer. So Shannon, can I hand over back to you?
Thanks, Werner. Yes, sure. We don't have anything in the Q&A, but I do see that BK Ngajani, sorry if I've butchered your name, sir, has posted a question in the chat. So it's got 3 parts to it. So I think I'll just read it out, and then we can just see who on the panel would like to answer that. Perhaps each of you would like to have a go. So he's asking, how can we use data insights to, number 1, advocate for stability through longer term engagements with the private sector? Because fiduciaries help clients who turn to have 30 to 40-year investment horizons, i.e. pension funds. The second part is to build robust, innovative finance models with more granular matrices, i.e. to stimulate first lost funding. And then thirdly, improve our stakeholder engagement and their understanding of data and technology to improve adoption. So it's quite a long question there. I'm not sure who would like to take a go at answering that one.
It almost seems to me like Miriam, you would be between you and Vernon. Definitely suitable to answer the first 2 questions. Any takers?
I'll have a crack. You know, I was thinking when I was listening to that question, I was thinking of the investment plan, the short term, the medium term, the long term, and then the bankable projects that Miriam mentioned earlier, and then how to manage those effectively and efficiently so that the funders want to fund and that they are comfortable to fund those, especially when there's a revenue expectation down the line, because that's the only way we're going to get money from the private and other sectors to actually help, because the stimulus funding is almost like a once in a lifetime opportunity, right? Before the stimulus funding, we had lack of funding. And after stimulus, there's going to be a lack of funding again. So we're going to have to give that confidence to investors that there is a bankable list of projects, pipeline of projects that they can invest in, and they're confident to invest because they know that money is going to be managed effectively through efficient and effective program project execution. And data and information is important for that, because there needs to be a progress or reporting against where those funds have been consumed. Have they been consumed on the right projects, and etc. So it's extremely important to have that flow up, like I mentioned earlier, from the project level to the program level, because the program is saying we need to reduce infant mortality rates, for example, right? And those projects, as an example, need to make sure that those objectives are achieved. And then that rolls up to the portfolio level. And so having that overall view is going to give confidence to those fund sources, if I can call them that, and then drive confidence that it's an investment that they're going to want to, support and get the revenues back, and I guess have a better view on the timeline on when they can realize that revenue.
Yeah.
I don't know if that was that's what I got from that. Sorry, I'm not sure.
Yeah. Thanks, Vernon. Miriam, do you want to contribute to the discussion around 30-40-year horizon? I know there's a big focus within the NIP around maintenance, the maintenance phase of infrastructure, which I think now is a little bit neglected.
Well, I think that the main thing that he or she is raising, BK, I'm not sure what that stands for, But it seems to me that the main point is that we need stronger data insights, and no one would argue with that. And part of the thing that we're trying to do is to strengthen the quality of, firstly, the information in the public sector to start with, and how that and the transparency in the way it's communicated. I mean, that's the starting point. And then the pushing up of regular information, particularly because we really struggle at a municipal level, and anyone will know. And this is how we ran the telecom change: is anyone will know that when you're not in a good situation, as we're not in the municipalities around delivery, that we should have regular information flowing up in relation to improvement in the capacity on the ground, delivery mechanisms, etc. And so just in terms of public sector delivery and the engagement with the private sector, I would have thought that those types of things would be very important, if I understood the question. I wasn't sure if I did, but I hope I do. I wonder if I can, oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Oh, I'm going to be a little bit naughty because I don't see any other questions in Q&A, but I just wanted to ask, Cobus raised a very important issue, which is not in the Q&A, but I think it's a very interesting thing for us to think about, which is, and I've been thinking about it, which is this problem of cybersecurity and how we manage it, because it is out of control globally. And we have, and it can be very random, and most companies are not ready for it. And as he's saying, I think that point that he's making, I'm not promoting Oracle. I'm not in their employ or incentivized by them, just so you know. But how, South Africa is one of the most targeted countries in the world for cyber attacks. And you saw what happened with Transnet in the past, and the ports being shut down. It's a very big issue. Our banks have also been attacked, as you know, et cetera. And I think you're raising something very interesting, which is, how do we think about, it's very hard to know how one protects oneself when it feels quite random. And actually, sometimes it really is random. It's some random kid. It's we say it's the Russians maybe, but it's sometimes just some random kid somewhere, and some random kid who solves the problem, who finds the kill switch. It's like that these days. It's really like terrorism, actually. And the point that Cobus is making, to say, maybe there should be a bigger conversation about how to manage that, how to rather have competitive firms who are competing on the basis of their security capability, and companies rather holding them to account and then focusing on their core business, is not a point that I would like to just pass by. I think it's actually a pretty critical point, not just for the community that you're serving now, but for all of us.
Yeah, and I think to add to that concern, Miriam, is a lot of infrastructure construction is like a key national point. If you think about a large dam, an airport, a data center, those become strategic national points. So the last thing that we want is for our project data, plans, drawings, models to leak into the hands of somebody that could use it for ill-advised reasons afterwards. So I think it is a very, very valid discussion around security.
The threat is much more than that, as we saw. It can shut down countries. It can shut down countries, health services, ports, banks, steal entire data banks of personal information, et cetera. It goes way beyond stealing plans of infrastructure plans, just to say. So,
if I might sorry, Miriam, just to add to what you've said, well, certainly there's a randomness to it. But by far the biggest threat nowadays is organized crime. It may have been in earlier years an individual or a couple of friends in a garage, etc. But for now, you get well-organized organizations that actually do these cyber attacks. And whether they sit in Russia or India or China, it's not necessarily important. The important thing is how we protect ourselves against those. One way is the use of technology, security technologies, of course, and then also by partnering with technology companies. Now, I work for one of those, and so I'll say that. But I think organizations like an Oracle and others similar to us has skills and is constantly doing research and development in terms of how to improve security technologies. So part of the business applications that you get is the technology and the security technologies, which is extremely important.
Yeah, and we as well, Cobus, we've got a massive cybersecurity organization within Accenture, and the security and protocol training that we go through is intense as well, and so we bring that to our projects as well. So we go through a client data protection, but also cybersecurity is now part of that. So yeah, it probably requires a discussion on its own, Vanna, for the future, but definitely very relevant.
Vanna, if I may go back to the question, the 30-year, 40-year view, I think when we speak about those kind of timeframes, we should rather start to look at asset management also, not just from a project point of view. So it's to look at the asset. Now, of course, very important if you look at those timeframes is institutional memory, I'm going to call it. There's not a single organization where I've gone to and worked with where if you ask information about specific assets, they will say, go and speak to person X that sits in the corner. He knows everything about that. So there was a time when that worked very well, but of course that doesn't work anymore. People are aging and retiring. People nowadays, the practice is to join an organization and then leave after only a couple of years, etc. So institutional memory is extremely important. So 15 and 20 years later, after an asset was acquired, you need to still have that information within the organization. Why did we make this decision? Why was this designed this way? Where are the as-builds, as an example, etc. Warranty information, all of this. And there's only one way of doing it is by having a common data environment that people can access, new employees can access after the people that were involved in the projects are not there anymore.
Yep. Thank you very much for comments and questions. I think we've run slightly over time. I can see the audience didn't mind too much because people didn't drop off over the last 5 minutes. I want to really thank all the panelists today. Thank you for giving your time so generously and providing engagement discussion, which is really relevant to where we are in time and place in South Africa. Can I hand back to you, Shannon? Shannon, you're on mute.
Sorry, I thought I'd unmuted myself. Thank you very much for that Q&A, for opening up a further discussion. I think there's nobody else that has formed any questions. So I think that will bring us to the end of our webinar. I would like to take this opportunity to say thank you to all our panelists, to you, Werner, to Vernon, to Professor Miriam Altman, and to Cobus. Thanks also to Oracle Construction and Engineering for making this webinar possible. I'd like to say thank you to the attendees for taking the time to join us to hear about the status of digital project and construction management technology adoption in the Sub-Sahara Africa construction market. If you'd like more information, please be sure to visit Oracle Construction and Engineering's website at www.oracle.com. If you haven't downloaded the Improving Construction Productivity report, don't worry, because we will send you a copy in a follow-up email. And finally, the recording of today's webinar will be sent to you in due course. And if you have any additional questions, please do be in touch. You can reach us at shannon@creamermedia.co.za. Thank you once again for your time. Stay safe and stay well, and goodbye.
Thank you very much.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.